We're moving on to the next session. It is a presentation by the conference's elite sponsor, which is the official e-learning partner, uh, ClassLink. I am humbled and privileged to introduce all of you to a gentleman who is the Chief Executive Officer for ClassLink, Burj Akian, and he is coming. Coming to us live from the United States. Uh, he has a presentation which he will be talking about. How do you make learning so simple for students anywhere where they are, even if I'm not mistaken, Verge, it's a bit of a witty comment, but I guess we're even looking at students who are right nowadays. Mars is the next destination, so I guess we can learn anywhere, anywhere in the entire universe. Verge, sir, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Fad. It's very nice to be with everyone here. Allow me to share my screen. There we go. And you're able to see my screen, right, Fad?
Yes, I can see that.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, good day, everyone. It's wonderful to be with everyone today at this conference. I'd like to begin by saying Assalamu alaikum. My name is Berj Akian, and I am the CEO and founder of a company called ClassLink. I'd like to share a little bit about our observations of what we have found serving students and teachers around the world with this change to this transformational shift that has happened to online and remote learning. Some research that I have here that I'd like to share with you all. So firstly, I'd like to invite everyone to visit this URL. I'm going to have a couple of polls, questions to share with folks and where we can gather shared information. And you can see that URL. It's pollev.com/classlink. So I'll show that again and again, just a few activities that we're going to like to do together. First one is quite easy, actually. We're asking, where are you from? So if you wouldn't mind, if you click on that, well, you don't have the link, I suppose, maybe Sneha, maybe you can put that URL right in the chat for folks. If they were to click on that, and we would be able to see where everyone is from. I'll put this up, and it looks like some folks are responding. I can tell it starts to populate the map where people are saying they are from. Appreciate folks taking time to fill this in. Someone's in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, maybe an island. That's very nice. Next, I'd like to have a conversation around where we are now with regards to COVID and classroom learning. This here is taken from UNESCO site. The reality is that again, the majority of students for sure around the world impacted by school closures. Where we are is a little bit different where we were in the spring. Well, many schools are operating, of course. They are not in the complete shutdown that they were in the spring, but what we have is partial. So it seems the majority of students around the world are involved in some kind of schooling experience that includes partly at school and partly at home. Now in the spring, as we all know, there was a significant shift, entirety really, of moving to remote learning. Here where we are now, lots and lots of countries are doing this hybrid model. This has created a strain for educators to try to figure out how do we educate in a shifting environment, an environment that sometimes has students in the classroom and oftentimes do not have students in the classroom. This is very different than the traditional model where most all students are in classrooms, or what we were in the spring where nearly all students were remote. Here now we have the oscillation between students being in school and being remote. and that creates new challenges. This transition to remote learning involves studies have been done with regards to this transition to remote learning. What I have here is a very recent study that was conducted by UNESCO, within which they identified 9 key measures that schools and educators can take to accommodate this new reality that we're living in. And I want to highlight 2 of the 9 that they found in their study. The first one that you see here is this idea of expanding the definition of what education can mean, in that it ought to include the importance of connectivity and access. Clearly here, the idea of access to learning resources and the idea of connectivity to one another and communication is largely around internet access. So you can see here the second most important fact that UNESCO came forward with, their idea, is this idea of connectivity to resources and having access to the information. The second item I'd like to point out is their number 5 in their list, and that is an acknowledgement that although traditional classrooms have been the foundation of learning throughout the world and over the years and years of education, there is now a clear need that traditional classrooms need to give way to newer approaches to learning. One of the things that we're finding in our experience working with schools around the world is this acknowledgement that it'll be unlikely that schooling will return to the traditional model of students and teachers entirely and exclusively in classrooms. The research continues to point to that now that students and households have had the opportunity to experience remote learning options, they will want to maintain those remote learning options. This brings us to my second poll here. And the question here is, what should be the indicators of learning in this new paradigm? And you'll see, I'll do this. I'm going to click on this research here. And these are the, one second, I'm going to activate the second poll. Here we go. And if you go over to that link, pollev.com, you'll see that there's the opportunity to vote for what you believe should be the measures of indicators. I see people are voting. I appreciate that. And you'll be able to see the results as people post them. The interesting things that we start to see with this research is that there tends to be these measures that we are all very accustomed to when it comes to what traditional learning experiences can look like. And you can kind of see here from what folks are voting on, you can see that these traditional measures of student engagement and participation revolves around attendance, retention, academic scores. You can also notice that when it comes to understanding the success of a schooling organization, you see indicators like staff engagement, administrator engagement. In a paradigm that shifts to all remote, many of these indicators become problematic to measure. And what we tend to find is that the utilization of resources becomes a proxy, becomes an indicator of overall performance, of overall health of the institution. And as you see here, it's interesting. I don't think I even specified that before, but you can see as people are voting, they're identifying student engagement with resources as one of the highest. They're identifying staff engagement with resources as among the highest. And of course, the administration engagement with resources as among the highest. Naturally, we would all presume that scores would be the very most, and they continue to be as people are voting, not surprisingly. In a paradigm where testing is reduced because it's less available, that primary indicator of testing students and the scores becomes difficult to achieve. And what we start to see is the engagement with resources starts to become the primary thing that school organization leaders look for. Well, if we're thinking about engagement as being the prime indicator, how can that be made available? ClassLink, this is an area that we excel in, and it is around access and analytics. Our solutions provide exactly this, our products provide a solution exactly in this area. First and foremost, ClassLink is known as a single sign-on resource, helping students access resources, helping instructors access resources. And we're next known for the analytics that help inform folks of what their resources are. I have a brief video here to share a little bit of that story.
To get remote learning up and running had to happen within 5 days.
You're thinking of a million things at once.
Then you start to wonder, okay, how's this going to trickle down to my kids, to my classroom?
This wasn't going to be a review period. This was going to be about us continuing learning for students and making sure that new learning was embedded in the tasks assigned.
We took stock of several of the tools that we had at our disposal. ClassLink was unbelievably helpful throughout this whole entire process.
ClassLink is our single sign-on and single source platform. So going into remote learning was an easy transition.
Students didn't need to remember multiple passwords. It was all right there. And I think that made a big difference for our students, but also for our staff.
Log into ClassLink. That was always step one.
Takes about 5 seconds to put in your lunch number and your password, and it just takes you there in a step.
It takes all the pitfalls out of the way that used to be the biggest problem about e-learning.
They automatically go to ClassLink. They automatically click on every app we need for the day.
That has been the thing that parents have said the most. You know, that they're grateful everything is right there. They don't have to go searching.
The principals and the teachers continue to use the analytic tool built into ClassLink itself to monitor student engagement, how much time they were spending in an application, and how many times they logged into it.
They can target the few people that are having real issues and spend the remediation time with them rather than kids that are doing okay.
And using My Backpack allowed the students to access the resources which they needed at home in a quick manner.
In one neat framework, we were able to share with the community, with our Board of Education, with our staff, that this was working.
And all that was made possible by a single sign-on.
They loved the information that was there, how it was presented, how easy it was to understand.
We're very happy that we made the decision to go to a single sign-on model, partner with ClassLink. This pandemic really showed us the importance of that partnership.
To get remote.
When we have this conversation around engagement and the idea of helping students, helping faculty achieve the tenets of what remote learning can look like, it is largely around the ability for them to be able to have access to their resources and to be able to do so from any device. We've seen the evidence of this in the research and the analysis that we've done. Here I can share with you a graphic of what the utilization has been in school systems that have the ability to provide access to their students in a transitional way so that they can easily move from in-classroom experience to remote learning. And this is what the data looks like. So here you see here the view of usage from the beginning of the year to about the beginning of May. So here we're looking at the first few months of the year as schools transitioned. What we found is that when we looked at the data, there was almost always a baseline of data, a transition period, and then a remote learning period. When we compared those usage pictures, what we found is we were able to find averages, average baseline usage before the transition to remote learning, a short duration of what the transition period was, and then during the remote learning. Invariably, there were school systems, school organizations where the usage rate went down. This could be because they didn't have the right access, students didn't have the right devices, instructors were unprepared, and so engagement wasn't as strong as it could have been. But that wasn't universally the case. In fact, what we found is 3 different scenarios. The first scenario is where usage actually increased. A second scenario is where usage stayed about the same. And a third scenario where that decrease showed itself. What we found interesting, though, is we went to look for this same pattern across lots of institutions. We were heartened because what we found is oftentimes it was difficult to determine exactly what that transition, when it was, and what it looked like. Here you can see in this, and if I were to ask you, can you point out where the transition occurred? You might presume that it was this week of low utilization as the transition period. In fact, for this organization, they had a 1-day transition. And the latter box here represents all of the remote learning that took place. In this institution, if I were to ask you, can you point out when that transition occurred? Again, you might point out to that week there, but in fact, for them, this was the transition week, and this low week here was their holiday week. And this happens to be one of those institutions where not only the average went up, but if you look closely, you'll see the weekend days, you'll see that those increased very significantly. If you were to compare the short columns on this side to the short columns in the remote learning. And here's another situation. This one's actually a little easier to tell. That was the transition week. And here too, again, utilization and engagement went up. As schools transition to remote learning, the idea of measuring the utilization of resources becomes a primary indicator of the success of the school. What comes next? We think, as I described earlier, we think school and education is transferring from an older model, a traditional model of binary, meaning it's either at school or it's not happening, it's in the off position, to something that's along the lines of a dimmer switch. This idea that when school is operational, it can operate and provide learning experiences in a range of solutions for meeting the differing needs of the student and the household. So we think that this idea of, on the right-hand side, this new model of lots of different levels of education is in fact going to be the method that prevails. We don't believe, just as it says in that UNESCO report, we don't believe that we can return to the world as it was before in education. This new model of access to anywhere, we believe, will prevail. And with that, I'd like to share just a little bit about our organization, the insights we have serving schools around the world and in presently 15 countries and over 13 million students that we serve. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you continue to have a wonderful conference and stay safe, stay healthy. Ibka aminan wasahinan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Burj. Just before we head into a break, I've got a question from the floor, and I guess pretty much you've covered it, but it has a few parts. I'll read it to you. I'll read it to you as how I've received it. will the style of education change post COVID-19? Because obviously we understand that things will change. So, to what extent with a the pre-COVID method will be adapted or continued in a post-COVID world? To what extent is the virtualization concept evolving? And another add-on to the question is that do you have any institutions out here in Saudi Arabia or in the Middle East with whom you're already implementing a blended learning or distance learning formula?
Thank you. I'll answer the second part of the question first. It's easier. Absolutely, yes. I think we have several dozen schools within, I think I want to say something 50 or 60 schools within the entirety of the Middle East, and then more specifically on the peninsula. The question about how does education evolve, what does it look like? I think what we're finding is that choice becomes a key driver. In a traditional model, the school had a preset curriculum, a preset methodology of instruction, and perhaps a range of subjects that they would be able to specialize in. I think now that we break down the barriers of the traditional school building, anything is possible to be taught to the student, because the school becomes the institution with which they have, of course, the enrollment relationship, but the school becomes the purveyor of lots of different learning experiences that they can provide through a range of participation options, participation full-time in the school building and participation part-time in the school building, or potentially no participation in the school building. And so the school has this opportunity to reinvent the different ways in which they can provide instructional experiences. So choice becomes a much greater factor in that learning experience. Also for the instructor. So not only from the student's perspective, also from the instructional perspective.
Thank you, Burj. To the audience, please do visit ClassLink's booth and do engage with their representatives out there. Burj is with us throughout the conference, and the platform is also live up until the 16th of November for you to engage with ClassLink. They have an array of solutions that are really, really fascinating that you need to check out. We will take a break for prayers, and we will resume the sessions in the next 17 minutes. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after our prayer break.